Go Broncos, and then did the Jesuit Volunteer Corps down in LA, serving at a day shelter for young people experiencing homelessness, aged out foster care youth, and sex trafficked young people. After JVC, I did some more direct service work with families, similar work to what I was doing as JV. And then at some point in time, I started working for JVC and been here for about 3.5 years. And I'm on the development and communications team, and happy to be here today.
Hello, I'm Rob. I'm also with the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. I did a year of service in the Philippines, actually, with the Jesuit Volunteer Philippines, which is like a domestically run program out of there. I started working for JVC about 2 years ago. I work closely with Dominique since she handles all the strategic communication. I handle all of the recruiting. And so our departments work together to do a lot of this engagement work that we're going to talk about today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Karen Bortvet-Estrada. I work for the Maryknoll Lay Missioners, and I do recruitment and relationship building for them, and then also serve on our communications committee. I also was a Maryknoll Lay Missioner. I lived and worked in Cambodia, and a few years before that, I did a shorter year-long domestic service program with the Border Servant Corps down in El Paso, Texas. I'm excited to be here with all of you today.
And I'm Tim Devaney. I'm the Director of Precious Blood Volunteers. I'm broadcasting from my basement in Independence, Missouri, which is a suburb outside of Kansas City. I went to Truman State University in Kirksville, Missouri. And after I graduated from college, I was a Jesuit volunteer with their international program, serving in Kathmandu, Nepal for a couple of years, teaching at a Jesuit high school there. After I came back from Nepal, I moved to Kansas City from St. Louis. And I worked for Christian Foundation for Children and Aging, which is now Unbound. I worked there for about 8 years, and then took a job as Director of Precious Blood Volunteers back in 2012, and have been working there since. And very happy to be here, and really grateful for everyone else being here.
Wow, thank you everybody for introducing yourselves. And I just wanted to offer a special thanks on behalf of the CVM staff, because these 4 people from the 3 programs that you've heard about today, they spent a lot of time reflecting on the things they've done online and how they've engaged virtually. And I think they have a lot of great stuff to offer. And I just wanted to thank them, because this was, this was done on their own time. And I know they sacrificed some other things to be able to be here and present with you today. So our vision for this session is to cover some specific topics about online engagement. Each of our programs and our representatives will share about one specific aspect. So we're going to cover audience, engagement, and impact, and a lot of sub-themes and categories mixed within there. But each one of our panelists is going to share a little bit of what they've been working on and ideas that they have, along with responding to some of the great questions and survey answers that you provided when you signed up for this session. They were really insightful. So thanks to everyone who filled those out. It gave us a lot to think about in preparing for this session. So without further ado, Tim, would you like to take it away?
One of the things that does help is to unmute yourself before you start talking. Unless the people on there are good lip readers. So I'm going to be talking about audience, how you choose your audience. And so just a little bit of background. Other than a website, social media, and web advertisements, we really hadn't done much before March of this year with online engagement. When our offices shut down, like probably all of you, we started working from home and started seeing a lot of other organizations and churches jump into having Facebook Live events, Zoom meetings, Instagram Live events. The communications director of the Kansas City province, the Missionaries of the Precious Blood, which is our parent organization, and I both started thinking about ways we could do some of these efforts in support of our mission and spirituality. And we talked about the different audiences we'd want to reach. So a few years ago, we had a marketing consultant help us out in thinking about who we were communicating to and how we tailor our message to those different audiences. Keeping at the forefront of all this, our charism, which is reconciliation, of the world and renewal of the church. And she asked us to break down our audiences into 3 categories. So the first category is a primary audience, which is the people you most want to reach, and usually fairly specific. So, like for example, at our for recruiting fairs, our primary audience are like when we go to like Notre Dame for their postgrad service fair, our primary audience are the students who are coming to visit our table who are interested in postgraduate service. So, like for example, one of the things we did was we looked at our banner and like what we had at our table, and we said who's the people we want to engage with and how does that reflect our charism. So we have our 4 pillars, and then we have 4 young people who are doing various things, service-wise. We have a person who's obviously engaged in educational work. We have a person who's working in healthcare, a young woman who's doing home repair of some sort, and Hector, one of our former volunteers, working with little kids. And so that's who we were going after, were college-age students who are looking to do a year of service. And a lot of them, and this is specifically for Notre Dame, people who are looking for healthcare placement. The secondary audience, and those are the people we would like to reach, but not who are very first people we want to get to. So again, going back to the recruitment fairs type event example, we like campus ministry staff, social concerns, office staff, and professors. And then there's a tertiary audience, people we need to be aware of. We might have something for them, but they're not necessarily people we're going to go after directly. So like, for example, a lot of times I carry around brochures for our vocations team for both our men's and women's communities. And if there's someone who comes to me at a college fair, which is fairly unusual, and is interested in vocations, then I give them a brochure which is stuck behind my table. So when we were looking at our potential audiences for the Facebook Live and other online efforts, engagement efforts, we looked at our different audiences. So we had our priests and brothers who are members of our community, our sponsoring organization, our lay associates, our current volunteers, our former volunteers, potential religious vocations candidates, people who went to parishes staffed by Precious Blood priests and brothers. And then out of that, we had 3 different online outreaches that were geared towards our primary audiences. So the first one, tapping the wine cellar, and I'm sad to say we haven't actually tapped any kind of wine for these, mostly because it's 2:00 in the afternoon on a Thursday. So we identified for our primary audience, our priests and brothers of our religious community, our lay associates, and people who attended Precious Blood parishes. In our secondary audience, we had people who are wanting a reflection for the readings for the coming week who aren't associated with our community. The second one we have, which is the one that I host, is a Facebook Live with our Precious Blood volunteer alumni. When I first started thinking about this, it was more of an opportunity for our former volunteers who are working currently in a nonprofit or in a ministry to share what they're doing, and then ask for financial and spiritual help from whoever is watching, listening. So at the end of the Facebook Live, if they're engaged in a ministry that needs those things, I'll ask them, how can we help you? And the first week we had a guy who is directing a homeless shelter in Bloomington, Indiana, and he made a specific ask for monetary donations, and I put the link to their website on our Facebook page at the bottom, or at the bottom of the Facebook Live in the comments. But when we were doing that, for our audiences, we looked at our primary audiences, former volunteers, most of us support them, the priests and brothers in our community, and lay associates, people we want to kind of show that our alumni are doing really great things and really help doing what we expect our alumni to do. And our secondary audience were potential volunteers, college staff. There was about 3 weeks ago, we had a guy who we had been recruiting and been in conversation with for volunteering in the fall. And he got on and started asking us a bunch of questions. He asked one of our former volunteers a bunch of questions. And it was great because he ended up talking to me the day after and saying, that really sealed the deal for me and made me choose to become a Precious Blood volunteer. And then always also college staff. Like we had a campus minister who was listening on because one of her alumni, or alumni of her institution, was being interviewed, and she left a note on there and she was watching. So that was kind of fun. And then the tertiary audience, which I hadn't actually listed out, are family members of our former volunteers. Almost every single one of these, we've had a parent or an aunt or an uncle show up, and it's been mostly moms because they love seeing their their adult children. And so they were, it was kind of fun because they left comments and saying, "Oh, hi," so that was kind of fun. And then we did one Facebook Live with our current volunteers. So with that one, the primary audience was potential volunteers, and I was trying to use it as a recruiting tool, and then also to support our current volunteers and kind of have them share their story. And so we had like 3 of our recruits got on, people we were recruiting got on, and we're asking them questions. And it really made a dynamic exchange between our volunteers, and they really felt like they were part of, helping share the story of Precious Blood volunteers. And then our secondary audience was college staff, priests and brothers of our community, and lay associates. And so I really encourage you, as you do these things and thinking about the online engagement, think about who you want to engage with and then why you want to do that.
Thanks so much, Tim. I just want to give everyone a reminder that you can drop questions in the chat box throughout the session, and we'll also have time for the end where you could come on and ask our panelists directly. Tim, did you have anything else you wanted to cover or share before we move on to Karen?
Again, unmute yourself, Tim. One thing that Mike shared when we were planning this is when I mentioned in my notes about the charism. Mike mentioned that I should probably have Mike do this because he said it's better than I probably will. But your charism being, Mike, do you have that? Because I'm trying to find that email where you said.
Oh, I got it. I can. Yeah, So Tim had sent his notes for the call, and I just in planning this call, we've all been talking so much about platforms and audience and impact and measurable things, and I really like what you shared as far as starting with that renewal and reconciliation as your charism, and everything comes from that. So the image that came to my mind from your notes was I think I wrote to you, hopefully program staff can begin to imagine a tree in which their charism is their root, their programs are the trunk, and the messages, which are delivered via Facebook, Zoom, email, whatever, are branches and leaves. So I thought that was the image that came to mind when you were describing everything you guys have been working on. So yeah, and we'll I imagine we'll have some questions for you, Tim. So we'll come back to you. But if you're okay with it, we'll invite Karen to share a little bit about that engagement piece.
Great. Thanks so much, Tim and Mike. So I've been asked to speak a little bit about engagement, and I'm going to pull the other panelists into this a little bit as well. One of the first things, though, that I wanted to say, especially after seeing the questions that came in, was that one of my biggest pieces of advice is to ask for help in engaging other people with whatever outreach you're going to be doing. I sort of break it up in my head as the internal and the external. What are we doing internally for our current volunteers and for our incoming volunteers, and then what's going external out on your Facebook Lives or your YouTubes and things like that. And one of the biggest things that I have found from our experience is the importance of having that team. Most of the stuff we do, there's 2 or 3 of us involved. So there's one person that you see in front of the camera, but there's someone else running the tech side. There might be someone else monitoring comments. So if you can pull volunteers or folks in, that was sort of my biggest piece of advice around engagement. The other thing that I just wanted to mention before sort of diving deeper into that was something that came up on a handshake call at the very beginning of when all of this started. And there was a statement made that for the Gen Zers, especially those in college right now, they weren't feeling a lot of bumps in the road around shifting to virtual. That virtual shift was very natural for many of them, and they didn't see it as a barrier. And I know some of us older generations, that's not our natural way of existing. We're used to being in person. We're used to being face to face. But I think if we can start to say, okay, if they're not seeing it as a barrier, how do I remove the barriers that I'm putting up, has been something that's been helpful for me. So when we're thinking about engagement, one of the things that we talked about are what are the platforms that we're using. For the Maryknoll Lay Missioners internally, for our retreats and for our gatherings with sort of a certain target audience, those settings where you have to RSVP or certain people are only going to be in the room, we're using Zoom. And I think that's probably fairly common across the board that a lot of people are using that, but we're really trying to take advantage of things like the breakout rooms and the different settings within Zoom to have smaller, intimate communities where people can really share. Externally, we also use Zoom, but we use something called Restream, R-E-Stream, which allows you to take Zoom and put it out onto live platforms, and you can put it on multiple platforms at the same time. So it allows us to do the interview on Zoom, but then it goes out on YouTube Live and Facebook Live at the same time. For us, that was really important because that audience piece Tim spoke to, a lot of our audience are older people who might not be on Facebook or might be intimidated by Facebook technology, or some of our folks are around the world and don't use Facebook. And so being able to put it on both YouTube and Facebook allowed us to reach two slightly different audiences, but by doing the same interview at one time. I just wanted to pause for 1 second and see if the other three panelists could just briefly name what are the platforms that you're currently using. In case people have questions, then you know what we're in touch with, so you can help. We know who can respond to your questions. So Dominique and Rob, what are you guys using?
Sure. So we use Facebook Live, Instagram Live, Zoom. The other apps we do use sometimes is Be Live. It's B.live. And that's another streaming software that makes it easy to share media and share people. So you can sort of rotate who's in the live, who's out of the live, if you want to share a graphic. So that's really helpful if you want to make it more of like a presentation. But we just stream our Zoom call straight into Facebook.
We also stream our conversations from Zoom to Facebook. So when we're doing outward facing, public facing stuff, we usually do it just on Facebook Live through Zoom.
Great. So one of the things I wanted to do was to share, I'm going to share my screen here for a second. I'm just going to leave this PowerPoint where you guys can see just the PowerPoint. So this is what for us it looks like when we're doing, we call them Meet a Missioner Mondays, and they go up on Facebook. And it is just, it looks like it's a Facebook Live, but it's coming from Zoom. This is the piece that I want to show people because people don't always take this into consideration. This is what it looks like where I'm making it. So you are seeing something that looks decent. I mean, this is my display that I use. A lot of us are recruiters, and you have your display that's on the table. It's now duct taped to my wall when I'm doing this. So this is what it actually looks like. There's boxes, there's TV tray. Usually I have one computer in front of me. When I'm saying, we have a question. Mike McCormick came to one of our recent Meet a Missioner Mondays, and I say, we have a question from Mike. I'm not looking at Facebook. There is another colleague who is sending emails to my phone with the question and the person's name, so I don't have to get lost in all of the many comments that are coming in on Facebook. I have a phone that I'm sort of cheating off of. So I wanted to put this up here because I think a lot of times there's this idea that you have to have this fancy recording studio or, it's intimidating, but this is literally duct tape on my closet. The closet is in front of me because the fabric helps muffle the bounce back from the sound. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so you can see this a little bit bigger. I literally take my headphones and I have an extension thing on it, and I run this up my shirt so it's like one of those hidden microphones, and stick it in my ear so you can't tell I'm on a microphone. It looks like we're just on a normal call, but it's cutting out a lot of the background noise. So there's a lot of little tricks like that you can do that I think are helpful when it comes to engagement. And it makes you look like you got this, what's going on, but what they don't see is like the lamp that's like tilted sideways on a folded up pillowcase to make sure your lighting is right. So Tim is also pointing, he's got his background there, which is also his display. I don't know if you guys can see Tim, but behind him is his basement. But he just throws that up there and it sort of changes the whole scene. one of the questions that came in about engagement was around authenticity and how do you authentically engage over a platform like this. And the first thing that came to my mind was, I don't know about all of you, but I grew up in a culture where like we're trained to put on our poker face. Like you're not supposed to let your reaction show on your face. And I think sometimes women, this is almost drummed into our heads a little bit more, that like you're not supposed to be emotional and you're not supposed to show that. And when I worked in Cambodia, I worked with the deaf community and had to really unlearn that, because in sign language, you communicate with your facial expressions. And so when we're doing these electronic engagement platforms, I really try to dig deep into that, because if I'm authentically responding to something, if I'm working with my deaf colleagues, they're not going to hear me chuckling. They are going to be relying on what they see on my face, which is the same as happens in these experiences. So I think the more we can sort of take off our poker face when we're doing these, it allows us to have some sort of authentic encounter. Another note that I made on that when we're talking about the external audience is, I mentioned I sort of have a team that I work with when we're doing these Meet a Missioner Mondays. So we ask people to say, where are you watching from? We respond to them. So there's someone whose sole job in that, not me, is sitting there typing in comments and responding to people, thanks for watching. We ask people to ask us questions, and then we try to call them out by name and say, you know, so-and-so's watching. If we know who they are, we give a little background, so-and-so who's a returned missioner. So we're trying to create that dynamic that you would have in person, but over an electronic platform. I also think for many of us on this call, we're recruiters. Like what we engage with people, we form those one-on-one connections, and we know how to do that. So it's just sort of shifting the platform, but using those same skills that we use at a college fair and encountering the person that's right in front of us. The other piece of that I wanted to speak to was the internal, because we did a discernment retreat. It was supposed to be in person over Easter. And so we had about 3 weeks to shift the entire thing virtual. And that was where things like breakout rooms really helped us to have those authentic encounters. We also had each of our attendees paired with a mentor. So it was a one-on-one phone call so that it took them out of that Zoom world and they had that one-on-one encounter. It wasn't with us, because sometimes that's hard if there's one of us and 24 people to authentically connect with everybody, but we were using our returned missioners, so your former volunteers, to help bridge those barriers of authentic one-on-one connection. And for us, that worked really well. It made for a huge retreat because we had 24 participants, which meant we had to have 24 mentors to manage each of them and to have those one-on-one phone calls, but it provided those who were engaged the opportunity to feel like they were really in that retreat setting and forming those relationships, even though they couldn't be sort of side by side touching one another. The last piece that I want to speak to, and then I'm going to sort of throw these same questions to my other panelists about engagement, was the idea of there were a lot of questions about how do you connect and what does that look like, especially with people having different learning styles. So I wanted to share on my screen again a couple of the things that we had done with our discernment retreat. Just can all look at my hallway one last time. So we actually sent out a virtual packing list to everybody who was going on our Holy Week discernment retreat. And the idea behind this was everybody can't necessarily be in the same place, but they can still create a retreat-like space. And our retreat facilitator would speak to some of these items. She would say, you know, dip your fingers in that water and sort of engage with these items that you have used to build your retreat space. We also offered prayers that each had activities that you could do on your own, because we were working across 6 different time zones on that retreat. And so we couldn't do prayers together. So we had to set up these different activities that everyone would sort of do on their own, and then they would bring those reflections back. That even involved, I was cutting out pieces from magazines and snail mailing them to people who didn't have magazines in their household, so that they could sort of still bring in that interactive piece and not just be staring at a screen the whole time. Going along with that, we did have our virtual packing list, and then we had them sort of set up their own little retreat space I think you can see there. And so it helped. This was my retreat space. So you had your call going on, you had your retreat facilitator there, but then you had your little altar or your little retreat prayer space right there as well. So that was how we tried to bridge some of those barriers of different learning styles and make sure that people weren't just staring at a screen. We also are a little unique in that most of our, or many of our participants are not just recent college graduates. So a lot of them have barriers of technology. One of the people who was coming on this retreat had no home computer at the time she signed up for the retreat. So she was going to have to do everything over the phone. And so again, we had everything structured so we could snail mail her all of the guides in advance and she could just phone in. I guess what I learned from that was really the, instead of, initially I was like, I don't know how we're going to do that. We'll have some people on the phone and we'll have some people on video. But it was, again, sort of looking at myself and saying, okay, no, like we are creative people. Anyone who works in a postgrad service program is a creative person. So instead of seeing the barriers, it's saying, okay, this is a new challenge. How am I going to get over this? So now I just wanted to sort of pitch those questions around authenticity and engagement to Tim, Rob, and Dominique, if you guys have anything from your different experiences you'd like to add in. Maybe Tim, can we start with you since I started with the JVs last time?
I think that part of being unique and authentic is just being yourself. I don't, other than, I try to dress fairly conservatively so that way I, can kind of fool them once I start talking. So frankly, I just try to be myself and not put too much of a guard up when I'm doing that. I think sometimes myself being a little bit silly on a phone call, on a online chat, and even in person, I feel like that disarms people a little bit because it's like I don't, this is who I am, this is what I share, and really putting that out there at the front. Because if they don't like this, they're going to figure that out sometime, I guess.
I can share a funny, so I'm pretty authentic on our live calls. If something's not working or, I'm not trying to hide that from folks who are tuning in. There's really no reason to. If things are like real bad, like one time, me and Tim both commiserated about Facebook Live, and they have a thing called Live Producer. Do not use it. It does not work. Your Zoom call will just drop off. So they're that new aspect of Facebook Live's platform, they offer it. Don't opt in. It's not a great look when suddenly you're still talking to the person, but it's no longer live streaming on Facebook. So that's an insider tip. But like when that happens, there's no other choice but to be authentic with people that tune back in and like, sorry, we just dropped off for a couple minutes. Technology, and people are very understanding of that, as they would be if you were in person and you didn't have that lighter to light the candle that you're supposed to use for a prayer, or the microphone that was supposed to be in the room suddenly isn't working. People are understanding when they're in person, and they're just as understanding when you're on a call, like a Zoom call. Yeah, PSA, do not use Facebook's live producer. So I'd say we're pretty authentic, and I think one aspect of JVC that stands out, particular within our 4 values, right? We always are, people considering the program, we're very honest about the fact there's going to be multiple people in your house, and they're going to approach each value very differently, right? So that's actually like a part of our brand. So people are expecting, if we're collaborating with other folks and having them on the call, there's going to be different voices and different aspects of their personality that are going to naturally come through. They're not expecting us to be robots just because we're on a screen, right? So keeping all those things in mind.
Dominique, since you mentioned the Facebook Live warning, it does cut off after 4 minutes, and it was really bad in our case. But the other thing that's is authentic about this, our current situation is, like if you have kids or somebody you're sharing a house with who's not a kid, a lot of times they'll have come walking in. The other day I was doing a Facebook Live, and our storage area is right next to my studio office, and it was about 4 o'clock, and my wife had just started making dinner, and something that we had was in the in the pantry. So I feel something brush the back of my chair, and I looked down, and I was sort of shocked because there was a human being crawling behind me. So yeah, I just thought I'd share that.
Yeah, I'd like to add something on the engagement piece. Here at JVC, I think one thing that I've always had a mindset in recruiting, which I'm sure many of you might be familiar with, is we go to these places, we meet you in person, and people just come to our table and they come to us and they have, oh, I'm interested in this value, I'm interested in this piece of formation, and they want to learn more, and that becomes kind of like our habit, right? We share our program and they come to us. I think this online engagement has really switched our understanding from they're no longer coming to us because we're at home, but we have to go to them. So figuring out, how do I meet you where you're at rather than just going to your school? Because I think that was us meeting them where they were by going to their schools, or going to their retreats and things like that, doing their formation. But a lot of my questioning now is, where do I need to meet you? Now that I can't be anywhere physically, where do I meet you? I think one anecdote that I think is really great is Dominique asks a lot of questions when we have a lot of meetings with different constituents, whether they're external or internal. A lot of times we'll ask incoming JVs, oh, what excites you about JVC? And kind of throw that out there. What are you excited about? Or what are you anxious about? And we'll get a couple answers, inviting them to where we are to kind of see the program. But one time Dominique just asked, what are you eating during quarantine? And the list was more, like, we saw more answers just in that question than inviting them to the program, right? So I think framing your questions to be like, I'm going to you, rather than what do you want from us, or like, what are you coming to us for? Let's frame all of our questions and our engagement to say, what can I do for you? Or where do I need to meet you? And just asking a question as simple as that, what are you eating, became a point where a lot of volunteers started connecting. They were sharing different snacks. They were sharing their experience together. And I think that was really special, just framing questions in that term of engagement.
I think the last thing that I would add on engagement is, one of the questions I think you all answered before you came to this was, what would you be doing now if you weren't at home and weren't doing things virtually? And one of the things that's come up in a lot of the calls I've had for the next discernment retreat we're doing is this idea of table fellowship and gathering around meals. And we're looking at ways to still do that so that you can have those personal conversations, but by using Zoom breakout rooms. We aren't going to have our whole 40-person retreat on one Zoom call trying to talk, because not everyone's going to get to share. But we're looking to divide people up into 4-people table groups where they can gather for a meal. One of the other Maryknoll expressions had an ice cream gathering, and so everyone brought their own ice cream. They divided up into groups of 2s and 3s so they could have that interaction, because a lot of people I've talked to, that's what they're missing, is some sort of personal interaction. I think, like what Rob is saying, what are you eating? People want to know that they're human beings and someone sees them in this time when we are sort of maybe only able to see ourselves in the mirror if we live alone. I'll throw it back over to Mike, and then I think the JVC team.
Thanks, Karen. And thanks, Jen, for the question that just came in. Yes, this presentation is being taped, and we'll have a copy up on YouTube and the CVN website. We probably won't get that today, but after the weekend and the holiday, we'll have that posted, and we'll send a follow-up message. Yeah, Karen, I thought that was a great section and a bridge to our impact section. So we talked, just to recap for everyone a little bit, we talked about audience. Tim started us off on thinking about, what are the different types of audiences? There could be internal, there could be external. In the case of Precious Blood, there could be primary, secondary, tertiary audiences, and maybe some things you're doing apply to all of them, maybe not. But that's really good to think about. Thanks, Tim and Karen. I think some of the ways of engaging authentically is, short part of it is learning technologies and platforms, but another part of it is just being real and being yourself. And I think that being real and being yourself piece might be a pretty good lead in for what Dominique and Rob have to talk about impact. So I'll turn it over to you two, and I'll just ask again if the questions that you asked ahead of time and the questions that are coming in now, these are really good. So keep dropping questions in the chat box, and I think we'll wind up with a few minutes for Q&A live with our panelists. So yeah, Dominique and Rob, take it away.
Sure. So as part of this bridge, I also wanted to just share my screen, and there was a question about how would you compare virtual engagement and in-person engagement. And so to start, I would just say, think about the things that you tangibly plan for when you are in person. So when people are entering, you are normally handing them like a handout that they need, and you're saying, how are you doing? Then when you start a Zoom call, that's the same thing you should be doing, right? Do they have that handout in their hand beforehand? And how are you greeting and welcoming them? And what ways are you doing that? So for example, for JVC, we hosted for incoming volunteers a meeting where they had the opportunity to meet one another. So it was a little happy hour. And so the prep for it looked like, what are we doing pre-start? So what time is staff arriving? And then as people are entering the call, how are we introducing them? So one way is to use the chat function, which this is what they saw when they entered. What you were just seeing was what staff was seeing, but so when they entered, this was really big and very clear. So if they were new to Zoom or confused, it was bold as day. Like, these are the ways that we'd like you to start off the call. So if you could rename yourself, let us know where you'll serve, pronouns, all that good stuff, and then use the chat. So getting them to use the functionality at the start of the call so that they're invited to continue to do so throughout, or if you're going to ask them not to, just being clear that that's the case. Rob mentioned the food question. I love food questions, apparently, because the question we asked them was like, do you have the cilantro gene that makes cilantro taste like soap? So right away there was conversation around that. Oh, what is that? Do I have that? I hate cilantro. I love cilantro. And just building conversation around something a little bit silly to sort of break the ice, as Tim sort of had mentioned earlier about bringing in his personality and humor and all those things. So there's little ways to do that. If the space is the total opposite and you want it to be a little bit more serious in the introduction, just being mindful of that and crafting some sort of engagement at the start that supports that type of space that you would like to create. And once you set the stage for that, people they sort of adhere to it and are happy to oblige, because that's why they showed up, whatever you're offering. So since this was a happy hour, a funny question like this works perfectly, right? So another thing I would say, virtual versus in-person, if you're like JVC, we love collaboration, we love partnership. So bring in people that you want, folks to hear those different variety of voices. So for example, this was incoming JV. So we had an international program JV who was in Peru that is now stateside lead the prayer at the top of the call to bring in other voices. Also, Karen had mentioned, like, you don't want to be running the whole show, so you get very tired if you do so. So it's really important to, take breaks, and having folks, delegating to folks different aspects of the call can be really helpful, in the same way that you would likely do that in person, right? So you wouldn't be the MC, the speaker, and the person pressing play on the PowerPoint. So there's no need to do that on Zoom either. So like I said, this is a really great way to structure your prep time before, so it doesn't have to be super intensive, right? Think about what you want the start of the call to look like when people enter, the welcome, who's doing the welcome, is there an opening prayer, and then the content throughout. Leave time for questions like you would if you were in person, right? And then Karen mentioned this cool feature, which JVC has used, which is the breakouts. So we did a breakout groups for the incoming volunteers and did icebreakers, right? So we had different folks, staff members. Luis, one of the JVs that I had mentioned, he also helped lead one of the breakout rooms. and then they had fun, right? And then afterwards, you want to, I should also say, as you would in person, you would be able to sort of set the stage for when things are wrapping up. So because you're not in person, and if you're going to do breakout groups, just being really clear about what the expectations are for when the call is going to wrap, and how you're closing, or ways to stay involved after. So setting that expectation. If you were to say, if you were on a retreat and you were going to break out people, and you're like, you can go outside, you can sit on the grassy knoll, and like all these beautiful places that a lot of times we have at retreat centers, they're not going to know when to come back and stuff. And the beauty with breakout rooms is it does give a warning, like you can sort of warn people when it's going to wrap, but just be mindful so that they know and they're like anticipating those things. And then the last thing, I'm essentially talking a lot about consistency. So in terms of like really, I know there was questions around promotion too. So I just wanted to touch on that. So for example, JVC hosted masses from the 29th of March through the end of April every Sunday. So every single graphic about masses looked like this. They were just different colors, had different dates. So as you're building trust and engaging with folks online that might not be used to interacting with you in this way, just making the same graphic for the same type of event can be really helpful, because it sort of trains people to know, the same way that you see the Zoom logo and you're like, okay, I know that's a Zoom logo. I've been on Zoom calls for the past 3 months every day. Is the same way that folks who are looking at your pages or getting your emails are saying, oh yeah, that's Sunday Mass is coming, because they're used to seeing that same graphic. Yeah, I think that's a good way to engage with people virtually and in person, is definitely just consistency, being really clear, collaborating with folks whose voices are really important and would likely be present if you were in person as well. And then lastly, the opportunity to engage people that would not otherwise have the chance to meet or speak with one another has so many benefits to the virtual side of things that we didn't anticipate, and Rob will get more into that in a little bit.
Hi, everyone. I'll be as brief as possible, knowing that we're coming up on this top of the hour, but I do want to just be very transparent to say the questions you asked about impact, why should I be doing online engagement, are very transparent, right? And I think the two questions that really stuck out in what you all offered was, how do we even recruit, or how do we even engage when we don't even know what it looks like 4 months from now, when these programs can begin? And I think the second one is, how do you know that online engagement is even worthwhile in authentically building these relationships? And those are just really real questions and real concerns when we're engaging over a screen. So I do want to point those out and use those as my framing for this little segment here. But I think this all comes down to, like, what is the benefit, right? Why should I be doing this? And when we're recruiting the program, we don't know what 4 months will look like from now, but I'm very confident to say that we know what our programs are. We know what our programs offer, and that content has to be shared somehow. If I can't go to a school, if I can't go meet people in different mixers or different events, I'm very confident in all of our programs to say what we do needs to be shared. And I think that's what makes it worthwhile to recruit, right? Although I don't know when we might begin again, although I don't know if we will have enough volunteers for the upcoming year, it's safe to say and important to say that I at least need to talk about my program. I at least need to share the values that I'm trying to build. And how can I do that? How can I talk about the values that I've instilled in my life? How can I talk about the values that have been instilled in the values or in the lives of so many former volunteers or current volunteers? And how do I profile that? So I think not only, you're not just recruiting to a calendar year, you're not recruiting volunteers to serve for a certain amount of time. You're recruiting volunteers, you're recruiting constituents to a program, to a formation, and to the whole organization. And I think that's what the benefit of going online is. We're not just going to schools talking to prospective volunteers. We now have the whole world before us, and sharing about your program, the value of what y'all do is so amazing. And that needs to be said more often. So I tend to shy away, or not shy away. I tend to not think too much about the numbers of, you know, when things will begin, but more so what needs to be spoken, what needs to be manifested when I talk about JVC, and how can I do that to as many people as possible. And then how do I know if it's worthwhile even sharing all that stuff? And to be very transparent with you, I can only say this hindsight, I don't know if it's worthwhile, right? I don't. That's the reality. But this is our new normal, and this is what we have before us. So this is what we can do. And so I think it's worthwhile because my program, this program is worthwhile, right? And so I think it's also important to figure out what to you is authentic, what to you is worthwhile engaging. For some people, it's having as many voices in the room as possible. For others, it's making sure we do it consistently and having the space. For some, it's seeing a volunteer or a prospective volunteer or a former volunteer have a light revealed to them. I think a great story is on my end, and I can only say this in hindsight, I've been interacting with volunteers, both who are discerning our program and who have already signed our program agreements and have agreed to be a Jesuit volunteer. And many of them have reached out to say, hey, thanks for, if they've signed, they said, thanks for welcoming me. I'm excited to go. These are my questions. I know you might have the answers, but because you've been so transparent with me, can you at least talk to me? And that has been, for me, a success indicator. On one end, for those discerning, maybe my goal isn't to make them JVs and have them end up in our program, but for them to come out with conviction. And I've had people reach out to me to say, hey, thanks for discerning with me. I don't think this program is for me, but now I've found the program for me. Now, thanks for sharing CVN. I'm going in that direction. Thanks for giving me that space. And I think that is really worthwhile, is when people come out of your engagement with an answer, with direction, not necessarily with the answer we want, if we want them to be our volunteers, but they're coming out with conviction and a little more gusto, if you could say, right? And I think that's what the power of engagement is. If you
Rob is providing us an example of authentic engagement here that sometimes you just freeze with whatever face happens to be on at that moment.
Yeah, I think there were some, I'm trying to see if I could maybe fill in some of the things that I know he was going to share. I think some of the benefits he was talking about, the way, this is how we both sort of approach things, but what is the space you're creating and how do you want people to feel? So like, what are the three, and I think I probably shared this at some point in time with CVN members before, but like the idea of what do you want people to walk away feeling? And that's what the goal almost is of the event or whatever it is you're creating. So the other things that I believe he was going to talk about is like the opportunity to create resources and only if people are looking for those, right? So what are people coming to you for? When the pandemic hit, we not only offered masks as FJVs were looking for spiritual connection because they started spiraling into spiritual dilemmas because of the pandemic, but they also wanted resources from us, right? So we were doing both. So we were offering them prayers, offering them opportunities to continue to engage with these back in other ways, based on what they wanted, we're looking for, and we're hoping to feel more alleviation over, which was the spiritual aspect of what they were needing at that time. Welcome back, Rob.
Thanks, Dominique. And that's how online engagement works. You get kicked out sometimes. But just briefly, I want to tell 3 stories. I think one, what we've done is create resources. I think the benefit of going online is you can record everything and share everything. Dominique has done a great job of going on Instagram every week for just 10 minutes with a former volunteer, someone involved with the program, and she records it. And maybe only 5 people show up, 10 people show up. But now that content exists, now someone has a prayer that they can go to 1 week down the road, 2 weeks down the road. I think that's a real benefit, is creating those resources and getting access to them. The second story is we've been holding these masses. We had a mass, and these go live to the entire Facebook world. And we had a former volunteer reach out to us and say, hey, I haven't been involved with JVC, but thank you for putting together that mass. I haven't been attending mass even, but because I resonate with the Jesuit values, I felt like I should attend. And in a unique story, one of those former volunteers said, I want to put you in my will. And so now we have a donor. We have a major donor who, because of that engagement, wants to be a part of that organization again. So I think those stories like that really do make this worthwhile, really make it tangible that it's worth it. And it's hard, it's all in hindsight, but this is the way it is. And I think the real value is that our programs deserve to be shared, and that's the impact we have, is how much of our story can we get out as much as possible.
Rob, I just want to, you talking about kind of an unusual outcome or something you weren't expecting. As Karen was doing her Monday missioner visit, they had a few weeks ago, they had a woman named Ann Berry, Dr. Ann Berry, who is on, and she was in my batch of Jesuit volunteers. And so it was the first time I had seen her in 20 years. So that was kind of a fun little connection and an unusual and an outcome that Karen probably wasn't expecting when she started that.
I mean, Tim was my target audience. He just doesn't know that.
Yeah, definitely. I think the only reason I can say a lot of these stories is because they happened. Yes, a lot of our outcomes we did not expect, but they've been real blessings. And I can say, honestly, in this circle, it's a lot of grace, right? Just putting yourself out there. It pays off eventually. And so I think that's really all I can really promise you, is that it is worthwhile. And your programs are worthwhile. So I think just sharing that and creating the resources for people to reach you guys and then you to meet them with that content is really important. But yeah, I'll turn it over to Mike.
Great. And Karen, I just saw your message there. Did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I saw a question came in from Alexandra in the chat about, it says, can you share about the distinction of communication regarding initial contact and continued contact? Which platforms work best in initial and ongoing contact? I can just speak to Maryknoll Missioners on that one. I think our initial contact, we may have some people who find us initially through these live events, but they're probably hearing from us more through an email or through a graphic or something like that for initial contact. They're coming through those campus ministry contacts, similar to how we would find them when we were recruiting in person. And then the live content that we're putting out there and the discernment retreats and things like that, those are really the ongoing contact. So those are the ways that we're trying to nurture those relationships when we can't, have a returned missioner meet them for coffee or invite them to an in-person gathering. But I think the initial contacts continue to be more of your emails, posts, those sorts of things, working your human contacts.
And I know a stat, like that's fairly recent, that if you post something on social, because of the algorithms that exist in the ether, maybe 25% or it's really much lower than that. It's like under 10% of your followers are likely to see that post, whereas if you send an email, that goes up by like 68%. So I would say email. So you can draw people to a particular place from that email. So for us, people hopefully know that they could go to our a landing page on our website or our Facebook page. And that we use the events feature. So even if an event is on Instagram Live, it will say community prayer on Instagram Live. So that way they could get a notification if they're interested, because there's no real add this. We don't have add this to your calendar. So I would definitely say email is king. Email's king.
Hey, thanks for the thank you to our panelists for riffing on that last piece, especially around engagement. I just wanted to say to all our panelists and our attendees, we're gonna try to stay on for a few more minutes. We're past the hour, but we also started a little bit later just to get signed in and settled. So if you're able to stay with us, great. If you have to jump off because it's past 3, we totally understand, and thanks for being with us. So I just wanted to thank the panelists and share themes that I heard before I invite some questions if people have them. One of the themes that I heard each one of you talk about when talking about audience engagement and impact was collaboration and asking for help. I think we've all experienced that. There's a huge amount of pressure to do it yourself, to figure out perfect solutions to brand new technologies and some other unsustainable things. So just remember, as part of CVN, you have all these people on this call and many more people who are willing to help out. So please, everyone, remember to reach out for help. And the other thing I heard is opportunity. I've been thinking about that a lot. I've seen some unhelpful language in the business professional world about, using this pandemic as a time to think about opportunity. And my reflection on that is, I think this is just me personally. I don't think it's the right time to be opportunistic, but it is a time to pay attention to an individual opportunity that may be there to connect. And I think Rob highlighted that really well when he was talking about, on the surface, it could seem like our recruitment got messed up. We can't go to colleges, but there is and was an opportunity for JVC to stream masses and to connect with alumni. So there really are opportunities, and it doesn't mean that you have to have, I would say, like a toxic positivity about it. But I do think this is an interesting time to see what's out there. So I just wanted to share that. And now I would just invite anyone, if you've got a question that you'd like our panelists to tackle before we sign off in a few minutes, feel free to unmute yourself. And if you're speaking at the same time as someone, we can alternate. But we'll give you a moment to form and ask your questions if you like.
So one thing I just put in the chat, but I'll say it out loud too. There's no shame in buying your audience, sort of like what Dominique is saying, email it out and get people to come. I mean, when you're first starting trying to beat those algorithms, one of the big things is to get people to share it, get them to share your content if you're doing something live. Because if a person is sharing it, more people are going to see it than if it's just on your page because of the way the algorithms currently work, especially with Facebook. So, make your own mom log on. That's a number, that's a contact, ask your current volunteers if you're just starting out to, each log in and join you. There's no shame in buying your audience. Or maybe there is, but I have no shame, so I buy my audience all the time.
I have a question. This is Janice from Lay Mission Helpers, and I joined late, so this may have been addressed earlier. But just curious on the Zoom, because we use pretty much GoToMeeting, but it sounds like Zoom has a lot other options, and maybe they have the same in GoToMeeting. But I've heard about the breakout rooms in Zoom. What level plan do you need to have to get? Because we just have the free one right now, but because we rarely use it. But if we were going to look into getting Zoom, what level do you need to have the breakout rooms?
I think it's pro, so it's $14.99 a month. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add is, so for the happy hour, if you have people register in advance, you can also, like the night before, the day before, whatever it is that morning, export that list and import it. So you can basically break people out in advance if you wanted to. So that could be helpful if you needed to, you couldn't have an extra person on the call or something, and you needed to do it all yourself, and you didn't want to be sitting there like dragging people around. That's one feature that's also helpful within breakout rooms.
Great, thank you.
So I use Zoom all the time, but I've never done the breakout room, and I'm a little gun shy to do that. How does that work? I mean, I don't get it. Am I in both things, or what's happening? I don't get that. Go ahead, Karen.
Breakout rooms, I think, are pretty awesome. So you will be given, for example, this meeting, we have 33 people right now. We could say we want to break into 10 rooms, and you can select. Zoom will either randomly assign people to each of those 10 rooms, or you can, like Dominique is describing, sort of yourself assign who is in each room. So if, for example, you were doing a closing retreat with your volunteers and they're in different places, you could determine that you want, you know, the houses to sort of mix together, and you want a facilitator in each room. So you could on your own decide who are your facilitators and sort of pair up the groups that way. What I love about breakout rooms is I've found in Zoom meetings, if you have more than about 5 people, it's hard for people to all have a chance to share. And so you can make sure that you have those smaller gatherings.
Okay.
I put a link in the chat. There was, I just
Oh, that.
YouTubed how to use the breakout rooms, and I found that YouTube video to be fairly straightforward and understandable about how to get started on them.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for the questions and the replies. We have about 2 minutes, and we'll bring the call to an end. So if you have a final question, please let us know. And if not, I also wanted to ask our panelists, it sounds like people have asked if they can email you with something for follow-up. I think what we'll do is send a follow-up email after this session. But yeah, if you're comfortable responding to emails, we can forward to each of our panelists questions that come in after the call.
Mike, there was
And one other
another
thing
question in the
go
chat
ahead.
about virtual orientation. Somebody asked what folks are doing in terms of virtual orientation in August or what people are planning. At least for Maryknoll lay missioners, the decision as to what orientation will look like we're making in July. Because our missioners are all overseas, our determinations are a lot based on what borders look like outside of the US as well. So virtual is one of the options that we're looking at, but it hasn't been fully determined.
All right. So I think that's it. We'll wrap this up, and I just want to give each panelist a chance to say a goodbye message. So from Mike at CDN, this is goodbye. Thanks for being with us. This was just an awesome session, and each of our panelists, I invite you to say a closing piece or statement or a question, and we'll bring this to an end.
I have no closing statement, but I just want to say thank you to each of you. Just seeing all y'all in the same room really gives me a lot of fire and gets me excited about what we do. So thanks for being here, and thanks for just being so caring about this so much. I'm happy to share space with you.
You know, I just kind of want to echo what Robert was saying. Some people experience Zoom. I forgot what, you know, kind of being tired from Zoom, zoomed out. There's kind of zoomed out, and sometimes I do get that way. But when I get together with the good people from Catholic Volunteer Network programs, I feel a lot of energy, and it gives me a lot of energy. So I really appreciate that. And the one thing I'd like to just leave with is, feel free to just experiment with this stuff. It's fairly newish. A lot of people are don't have a lot of experience with it, and this is kind of a time to learn, and you can learn on the go. You know, I know I've learned a lot the last month or 2 months, and like Dominique said, not to use the live producer on Facebook. And but it can be a lot of fun. It can really get your creative juices flowing and really see where the Spirit's leading us all.
Yeah, Dominique here, tuning out, and I would say just to mess around with things. The first time that we have both internal facing, so we do a closed Facebook group for our incoming JVs. And me and another person on staff, Bryn, we hopped in there really low pressure, low whatever, and did a test run. Just the two of us talking and sharing our screen, seeing that it worked before we, went live in the big, Facebook page or anything. And you could do that with a staff member in a group with just you two. Make a Facebook group, and it's just, whatever your program's name is, tester, and try it out and see how things go, see what you like about it, see what you don't like about it, and just have fun. It should be fun, right? Your program, that's why you do your programs. The work you do is because you love it and it's fun. So as much of that you can infuse into virtual offerings, I invite you to do so. And thanks so much for having JVC and all the programs on here today. It's great to see you all, some of you.
I'm just going to agree with everything my fellow panelists said. Thanks so much, and don't be afraid. I know many of you, and you can all do this stuff. It's not as hard as it may sometimes seem. I know I was intimidated at first, but you make your mistakes and you roll with it.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. One final thanks to our corporate sponsor, LaCroix. And everybody have a great weekend. And like I said, we'll share this video recording next week. And thank you just one more time again to our panelists for joining us and for putting hours into prepping for this call. We really, really, really appreciate you. So bye-bye. Have a great Friday. Stay positive, stay safe. Take care.